Emily agreed to the trip before she even understood why. But something inside her had been pulling for a change. Something quiet yet urgent. Something she didn't want to name out loud. She and Jason had been together for years, steady and loyal, but recently their days felt like long, flat lines with no rise or fall, no spark. They weren't unhappy, but they weren't fully present either. Drifting in routines that once felt comforting and now felt heavy. When their friends, Mark and Olivia Bright, lively, deeply in love, suggested a weekend in a rented cabin in the Colorado mountains, Emily felt a warmth of relief. Maybe a new place would shake the dust off the parts of her heart that had gone still. The moment they arrived, the cold air hit them like a reset button. Sharp, fresh, full of possibility. The cabin smelled of pine and old stories with tall windows that framed snow-dusted trees like a painting. Emily inhaled deeply, hoping the new air would reach the places inside her that needed it. But almost immediately, she felt a strange shift around them. It wasn't bad, just different. Mark and Olivia carried this natural closeness, finishing each other's sentences, sharing glances full of unspoken meaning, moving like they were always tuned into each other. Jason loosened up around them, laughing more, joking more, his shoulders less tense than they had been in months. Emily loved seeing him like that, but it also stirred something uneasy in her. She remembered when he laughed that freely with her. Olivia hugged Emily from the side while they unpacked, her voice warm as she said, "This weekend will be good for all of us." Emily forced a smile but couldn't shake the feeling that Olivia knew something she didn't. The first hour was harmless, suitcases opened, blankets thrown over couches, a grocery bag of snacks spilled onto the counter. But under the surface, a current hummed between the four of them, something people feel before they understand. When Jason complimented Olivia's idea to bring board games, Emily felt a tiny sting she immediately told herself not to feel. When Mark helped Emily carry firewood, smiling softly like he could sense her thoughts running too fast, she felt her cheeks warm. Nothing was wrong. Nothing was wrong, nothing at all, but everything felt sharper, louder, more noticeable. Later, when they gathered in the living room, the crackling fireplace made everything feel too intimate. Jason stretched his arm across the back of the couch, almost touching Olivia's shoulders but not touching them, and Emily noticed even though she didn't want to. Olivia laughed at something Mark said, leaning into him, and Emily felt a small ache at the simple purity of their connection. She tried to relax, telling herself she was overthinking, but her mind kept circling back to that delicate tension in the room. The kind that wasn't intentional but impossible to ignore. She wondered if the others felt it too, or if she was alone in it, seeing shadows where there were none. When Olivia whispered to her in the kitchen, "Sometimes a new place shows us things we didn't know we needed," Emily's heart jumped too quickly, too anxiously. She didn't understand what Olivia meant, but the words stuck in her chest like they were holding a secret she hadn't been invited to hear completely. Emily brushed it off, forcing any doubts out of her mind. But as she walked back into the living room, she caught the three of them laughing at something she had missed. And she felt outside a moment she didn't even know had happened. She sat beside Jason, close enough to feel his warmth, but far enough to sense the quiet distance that had grown between them. She didn't know how to close it yet. Later that night, after everyone settled into their rooms, Emily lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying every small glance, every tiny shift in energy. Nothing dramatic had happened, yet somehow everything felt different. She didn't know why her heart was beating fast or why she felt like this trip would pull. Truths to the surface she wasn't ready to face. But deep down, she could already feel it inviting another couple was about to change everything. And not in the way she expected. The next morning. Sunlight spilled through the cabin windows, painting the living room in warm gold. But the cozy brightness did nothing to ease the tension lingering from the night before. Emily could still feel the strange energy between them, subtle yet undeniable, a quiet hum beneath ordinary conversation. Over breakfast, Mark cracked a joke and Olivia laughed. A sound that felt both joyful and piercing to Emily's heart, reminding her of the effortless closeness they shared. Jason smiled, but she noticed his eyes flicker toward Olivia more than once, just for a moment, as if he were searching for something in her expression. Emily tried to focus on her coffee, stirring it slowly, pretending this sudden, quickened heartbeat wasn't happening. But every glance and gesture seemed amplified, loaded with meaning she couldn't quite name. As they planned their day, talking about hiking trails and nearby waterfalls, Emily realized just how much she was observing, analyzing, measuring every movement, every laugh, every touch. When Olivia offered to help Jason with his backpack, adjusting the straps gently and smiling, Emily's chest tightened. It wasn't jealousy exactly, more a quiet realization that even small interactions could stir deep feelings, memories of what had softened in her own relationship over time. Mark, noticing the subtle shift, stayed close to Olivia, his presence grounding her, his hand brushing against hers occasionally in ways that seemed protective, affectionate, almost like a quiet anchor. Emily felt exposed, as if their ease with each other was a mirror, reflecting what she and Jason had lost in comfort and routine. They spent the morning hiking, crisp mountain air filling their lungs, but every moment of beauty was tinged with awareness. She noticed Jason laughing more, teasing Olivia playfully, and part of her wanted to join in, to relax. Yet another part of her felt a quiet sting of longing for a spark they once had. By midday, they stopped at a clearing with a small frozen pond, the sun glinting on snow-covered branches. The four of them stood close, talking, laughing, sometimes pausing in silence. Emily felt the moments stretch, charged with unspoken thoughts and feelings that hovered just beneath the surface. And she realized that none of them could act entirely normal because the truth of their emotions was pulsing too clearly in the air. When Olivia leaned closer to adjust a scarf around Jason's neck, Emily's stomach tightened. But she also caught Jason's hand brushing against hers, his way of grounding her, keeping her present. It was subtle, fleeting, but it reminded her that their bond was still there, fragile but alive. Later, as they sat on a log overlooking the mountains, the conversation drifted into personal territory. Mark shared something small about a fear he had once kept hidden, and Olivia reached for his hand, their fingers interlocking naturally. Emily looked at Jason, feeling both envy and relief, realizing she wanted what they had not in imitation, but in rekindling her own connection, in breaking the distance that had quietly grown between them. Emily tried to focus on the view, the vast horizon stretching endlessly, but her mind kept returning to the small, tender gestures that carried weight. Gestures she and Jason had stopped noticing in themselves. She felt a bittersweet ache, a mix of longing and hope, knowing that these moments were a mirror, showing her the emotional distance that could be bridged if she and Jason faced it. On the hike back to the cabin, the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows that danced across the snow. Emily's thoughts ran fast, her heart heavier than she expected. She realized that the presence of another couple hadn't created confusion. It had simply revealed what had always been there: unspoken desires for closeness, attention, and honesty. Back at the cabin, they settled near the fireplace again, the air warmer from the fire but still tinged with quiet tension. Conversation was lighter now, jokes and stories filling the space. But beneath it, Emily felt the undercurrent, the unspoken awareness that something had shifted, that the dynamics between them had subtly changed, and none of them could go back to the simplicity of before. She glanced at Jason, their eyes meeting briefly, and she felt a flash of clarity. This trip wasn't about the other couplet, was about awakening, about noticing what had been neglected, about recognizing the power of presence and attention in relationships. As evening approached, Emily sat quietly, letting the warmth of the room soothe the restlessness inside her, yet knowing that the night would bring questions they weren't ready to answer. There was a storm beneath the calm, emotions waiting to surface, truths ready to be spoken. And Emily sensed that when those words came, nothing between them would remain quite the same. Sunlight streamed through the cabin windows the next morning, casting long golden stripes across the wooden floor. But the warmth of the room did little to ease the tension that had grown quietly between them over the past day. Breakfast was slow, with mugs of coffee steaming in front of them, and Emily could feel the weight of unspoken words hanging in the air. Mark set down his cup first, breaking the silence with a calm voice that carried a strange mix of certainty and hesitation. "We all felt it yesterday, didn't we?" he asked, his eyes scanning the table to meet each of theirs. And for a moment, no one spoke, as if acknowledging that what he said was both obvious and fragile. Olivia nodded, her expression soft but thoughtful, a small smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "It's like our emotions got tangled," she said quietly, "and maybe we needed this trip more than we realized." Emily's heart skipped, her hands tightening around her mug because she knew exactly what she meant but didn't want to admit it aloud. Jason reached for her hand, warm and grounding, and whispered, "I don't want to lose what we have. I realize I've been distant, and seeing you all made me see what we've been missing." The words landed softly, but heavily, and Emily felt a mix of relief and fear. Relief because he was speaking honestly. Fear because honesty had a way of opening doors she wasn't sure they could close. Mark leaned back slightly, his calm presence steadying the room. "We didn't come here to complicate your relationship," he said. "Maybe we just reflected something back at you." Olivia looked at Emily with eyes full of understanding, and Emily felt a blush rise to her cheeks, a mixture of embarrassment and a strange gratitude for the clarity their friends had unintentionally provided. It wasn't attraction that had caused tension. She realized it was awareness, the mirror of seeing emotions they had ignored for too long. The room seemed to breathe with a new rhythm as they talked openly, carefully, about the subtle stirrings that had passed between them, about longing, attention, and emotional gaps that had been unnoticed for months. Emily noticed Jason's eyes, usually calm and steady, shimmer with realization as he reached for her hand again, this time squeezing it lightly to anchor both of them. She responded instinctively, leaning slightly closer, and the gesture carried more meaning than 1,000 spoken words. Mark and Olivia spoke softly, their voices steady but gentle, guiding the conversation without dominating it. They shared small truths about their relationship, not to compare but to model honesty and openness. And Emily could see how it inspired Jason to speak more freely than he had in months. Each word, each confession, each acknowledgement of feeling was like sunlight breaking through a dense canopy, illuminating parts of their own bond that had been shadowed for too long. Emily realized she had been carrying quiet doubts and minor resentments that had never been addressed, little cracks in their connection that had widened silently. Hearing Jason acknowledge the same tension made her feel both vulnerable and connected in ways she hadn't felt in years. The discussion wasn't easy. It was raw in its own gentle way, but it brought a sense of intimacy that had been missing. She noticed the subtle gestures, Jason brushing a stray hair from her face, Olivia resting a hand lightly on Mark smiling knowingly at her when he noticed her reactions. And Emily felt the delicate balance of observation and understanding that had transformed the atmosphere from tension to something profound. The cabin no longer felt just like a temporary getaway. It felt like a space of awakening, a place where hidden feelings could surface safely, where relationships could be examined without blame, and where the unspoken truths could finally find voice. By the time the morning melted into afternoon, Emily felt a quiet shift inside her. She had confronted her own insecurities, seen the cracks in her relationship, and recognized the possibilities for reconnection. Jason sat beside her, calm but alert, and she knew that they were both ready to face the work required to rebuild closeness, intimacy, and attention. The four of them moved through the day with a newfound awareness, noticing small gestures, catching fleeting glances, and sharing honest smiles that carried weight. Every conversation, every look, every subtle touch reinforced the lesson of the morning. Relationships thrived on openness, emotional honesty, and courage to confront what had been ignored. Emily understood that the trip, the presence of Mark and Olivia, wasn't about complicating their lives. It was about revealing truths, showing them what they had overlooked and giving them a chance to reclaim the depth of their love. And as the evening approached, Emily felt a quiet anticipation, knowing that the final night would bring even more clarity, even more honesty, and that nothing would feel ordinary again, because the moment for emotional transformation had arrived. Asterisk that night, the sky over the cabin was clear, stars scattered like diamonds across the velvet black, and the crisp mountain air carried a quiet stillness that seemed to demand reflection. Emily and Jason stepped outside together, leaving Mark and Olivia to gather firewood. And for the first time all weekend, Emily felt a sense of calm wash over her. The tension that had followed them since their arrival had not disappeared, but it had transformed into something gentler, a quiet understanding that nothing needed to be forced. Jason wrapped his arm around her shoulders as they walked toward the edge of the clearing, their breaths visible in the cold air. "I don't want what we felt this weekend to scare us," he whispered. "I want it to remind us to pay attention to each other again." Emily leaned into him, feeling the warmth of his body against hers, realizing that all the small gestures, the touches, and words of the past 2 days had already begun to shift something inside them. She thought about the subtle tensions, the pangs of jealousy, and the quiet longing she had felt. And she understood that it hadn't been about anyone else, it had been about reconnecting with what was hers and Jason's alone. Across the clearing, Mark and Olivia laughed softly as they returned, carrying branches for the fire, their faces illuminated by the cabin light and the last traces of the sunset. They joined Emily and Jason without words, a comfortable silence settling between the four of them. The stars above seemed to mirror the quiet magic of the moment, and Emily felt her chest loosen, her worries fading as conversation drifted naturally between stories, shared memories, and reflections on life. Emily watched Jason listen attentively to Olivia, who was recounting a funny childhood story. And she realized that seeing someone else's connection had reminded him of what mattered most. Mark glanced at Emily and Jason, a knowing smile tugging at the corner of his lips. And Emily felt a rush of gratitude for their presence, not as a threat, but as a mirror that had shown them the parts of themselves they had almost forgotten. As they settled near the fire pit, the flames crackling warmly, Emily felt a surge of emotions: love, relief, understanding, and hope, all blending into a quiet clarity. She could see Jason looking at her differently now, with awareness, with recognition of both the distance that had grown and the potential for closeness that still existed. She reached for his hand, holding it lightly, and he responded immediately. "Kay," his fingers curling around hers in silent reassurance. Olivia and Mark sat across from them, hands intertwined, smiling without needing to speak, their presence reinforcing the delicate balance of trust and honesty that had emerged over the weekend. They talked about dreams, fears, and regrets, each story revealing a little more about who they were. And Emily realized that the trip had become more than a getaway, had been a lesson, a gentle confrontation with their own hearts, and an opportunity to rebuild emotional intimacy. As night deepened, Emily and Jason stood to leave, looking back at the cabin, the fire and the stars, feeling the weight of the weekend settle into something positive. Jason squeezed her hand and whispered, "We're not the same as we were when we arrived, and that's a good thing. I see us again." Emily smiled, a quiet tear slipping down her cheek, because she understood completely. The connection they shared had been reignited, strengthened by reflection, honesty, and the subtle influence of their friend's presence. In the car on the drive home, the mountains fading into distance, Emily rested her head against Jason's shoulder, feeling safe and alive, aware that love required attention, courage, and a willingness to face discomfort to grow. The weekend had been unpredictable, emotional, and tender, but it had left them with a renewed sense of closeness, a reminder that relationships were living things, fragile yet resilient when nourished with care and honesty. Emily realized that inviting another couple hadn't complicated their lives, it had clarified them. It had opened their eyes to what they had almost let slip away and shown them that true connection required both reflection and action. Jason glanced at her and smiled, and Emily returned the smile, her heart full, knowing that whatever challenges awaited them, they would face them together with honesty, love, and renewed commitment. The trip had ended, but the lessons and the closeness they had rediscovered would stay, carrying them forward, reminding them that love was about attention, awareness, and never taking what they had for granted. And as the car rolled toward home, Emily felt a quiet thrill, a gentle hope that this weekend would be remembered as the moment their hearts found each other again in ways both simple and profound.